Samad, you start.
Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Everybody. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again. Long time no see. We're really very happy that today we are going to have really famous people, and specifically Mr. Rod Ellis. We do hope that that will be pretty much productive for all the participants. So, Eva.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's seminar. As you know, my name is Eva Tatarova, and I'm the manager at SR Teaching and Learning. As you know, SR Teaching and Learning is one of the international providers of different teacher professional development events. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them in the chat box. I'll definitely bring them up during the presentations, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. So before we start, I'd like to ask you one question. As you know, as usual, we start our sessions with tiny warm-ups. So the question is, what's your favorite part of being a teacher? Or what's your favorite part of being a teacher? But you should put just only one word. And while you're answering, I'd like to announce that this session is organized by TESOL Academy. And we'd like to announce that soon TESOL Academy is going to have a TESOL course. This online-only graduate TESOL certificate course with virtual lecturers is the TESOL Academy and the SR Teaching and Learning International TESOL Certificate. This will equip you with the skills to work as an English teacher everywhere in the world, and this provides online English teachers with new essential teaching methodologies and skills to deliver engaging lessons face-to-face and remotely. Also, I'd like to announce that we are going to have the TKT-CLIL online preparation course. So join the course and learn the key concepts and terms about teaching and learning that are central to TKT-CLIL, content and language integrated learning. This course is run entirely online with 8 Zoom sessions, which are focused on the abilities required in each part of exam. And the last thing for you to know today, that we're going to have our, let's say, famous course, IELTS instructor course. I should emphasize that the obvious benefit is entering the field of IELTS instruction will open the world to you, as the demand for qualified IELTS instructors is quite high around the world. So I can see your answers like about being a teacher. Yeah, learning, results. Thank you very much for your answers. And now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our first presenter. Our first presenter today is Professor Rod Ellis. Professor Rod Ellis is currently a research professor in the School of Education at Curtin University in Perth, Australia. He's also a professor at University, where he serves as the Vice President of Academic Affairs. Professor Rod Ellis is a visiting professor at Shanghai International Studies University as part of China's Changjiang Scholars Program, and an emeritus professor at the University of Auckland. So let's meet Mr. Professor Rod Ellis. Welcome.
Welcome. Nice to have you. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much for your introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be able to give a talk in your TESOL Academy. The invitation that I got to give this talk came from Paul Robertson of TESOL Academy in Cebu. What I plan to do is to talk fairly briefly, somewhere around about 20 minutes to half an hour. And my purpose is to give a brief introduction to task-based language teaching. And task-based language teaching is really an alternative approach to teaching to the dominant paradigm, the dominant traditional approach involving presentation, practice, and production.
Yes, just let me know when we should add your screen. Yeah, that's it. We have it.
Okay. Yeah, here's my first slide. Sorry, I thought you'd already activated it. Okay. The whole idea of tasks is that they provide opportunities for communicating. And really, tasks have always had an important place in language teaching, including in traditional language teaching. Many, many years ago, I used to teach in Africa, in Zambia. And you can see on the screen an example of a task that I used at that particular time. I asked the students to read a passage about a famous person, and then I chose one student to role play that person. And then the rest of the class had to fire questions at him or her, and the student had to try to answer them in the character of the famous person. And if the student got stumped, was unable to answer a question, then she sat down and another student had to go. So that's an example of a task. But at that particular time in my English teaching history, I was not actually doing task-based language teaching. I was using tasks, but not in task-based language teaching. Later on, I will explain the role that tasks have in task-based language teaching. We don't have time to give you the opportunity to reflect, but here are a couple of questions that you might want to think about. What activities have you used in your teaching that are like my role play tasks, that are tasks? And what is your view about the place of such tasks in your teaching? Clearly, though, we need to have a very clear idea of what a task is. And I try to define what I mean by a task in terms of 4 criteria that a language teaching activity must satisfy in order to be a task. So the first is that the student's primary focus is on meaning. In other words, when students are doing a task, they're not really trying to learn the language. They're simply being put in a position where they have to use the language. A task has some kind of gap. 2 gaps are very common. One is an information gap and the other is an opinion gap. And it's the gap that motivates the exchange of information or opinions. In other words, it's the gap that promotes communication. The third criterion is, in my opinion, very important. In a task, students have to rely on their own linguistic and non-linguistic resources. I mean, gesture, facial expression, etc., when they perform the task. In other words, they've got to make do with whatever English they have, whatever language they already have, and they can supplement it by gesture in order to try to communicate their meanings. So in other words, in a task, you do not actually pre-teach or provide learners with the language that they have to use. They have to use whatever language they have the best way they can to try to communicate. And in a task, there's a communicative outcome. And the task is completed when the outcome is achieved. Successful completion of the outcome does not depend on using the language correctly. It simply depends on whether you have achieved the communicative goal. So in order to get a slightly clearer picture, take a look at this. Students are given a script of a complete dialogue and put into pairs. Each student is allocated a part in the dialogue and asked to memorize the lines for this part, and then the students act out the dialogue. This is a very traditional type of activity. Is it a task? And I would argue that it's not a task, because the focus is not really on meaning. The students don't have to create any of their own meanings. They're given a script. There's no gap, because one speaker can see what the other speaker is going to see, because they can see the whole dialogue. and they don't have to use their own linguistic resources. The language is given to them in the dialogue, and there's no communicative outcome. The only outcome is whether they've been able to actually perform the dialogue. There's no purpose for doing an activity like this. Is this a task? Students are placed in pairs. Each student is given a picture and told that the two pictures are basically the same, but there are 5 small differences, and they're not allowed to look at each other's picture, and then they have to talk together, describing their picture, asking questions about the other person's picture in order to locate and then write down the 5 differences. Is this a task? Yes, the focus is on meaning. Is there a gap? Yes, because they can't see each other's picture. Do they have to use their own linguistic resources? Of course. I'm not providing them with any of the language that they need in order to accomplish the task. And what is the communicative outcome? Well, it's the 5 differences that they have to actually find. So this is clearly a task. Again, we don't have time to do this, but you might want to think about the role-play activity that I described earlier, and think again whether it does satisfy these 4 criteria: primary focus on meaning, gap, using own linguistic resources, and is there a communicative outcome? And if so, what is it? Here is another activity, and once again, I want you to look at it and see whether you think that this qualifies as a task. You can see that there's a shopping list, Mary's shopping list, and there's a list of items that Abdullah has in his store. And the students work in pairs, and one person is Mary and the other person's Mr. Abdullah. And then they have to make conversations, and then they're given an example of the kind of conversation they have to make. Good morning. Do you have any oranges? Abdullah, no, I don't have any today, etc. And so on. They can go through Mary's shopping list. She will ask about eggs, flour, powdered milk, biscuits, jam, etc. And they can perform that little model dialogue. So is this a task? I would argue not. You could argue that there is some focus on meaning, but there's no gap because the students can see Mary's shopping list and Abdullah's store, so there's no gap. And they don't have to use their own linguistic resources because they're given a model that they can use. All they've got to do is to substitute words in the model. It's a kind of substitution exercise, really. And is there a communicative outcome? No. What are they doing all this for? There's no communicative purpose. Here is another version of the same information, but this time it's divided because student A has Mary's shopping list and student B has Abdullah's store. And student A is given a purpose, which is that they have to decide which items on their shopping list they can actually successfully buy in Abdullah's store by putting a tick next to the items they can buy. And student B also has a purpose, which is to identify which items Mary asks for, his partner asks for, that he doesn't stock. So I would argue that what we now have is very clearly a task. The focus is very clearly on meaning, and notice there's a purpose for the communication for student A and for student B. There's a gap because they can't see each other's lists, and they have to use their own linguistic resources. There's no model that's been provided. And there is a communicative outcome, Mary's shopping list with the ticks next to the item she can buy, and Abdullah, the list of items that Mary asked for that he doesn't stock, right? So clearly a task. So you might want to take a look at a student coursebook, perhaps a student coursebook that some of you are already using. And you might want to look at the activities in it and try to decide whether the activities are in fact tasks or are exercises, practicing language. Are there some activities that seem to have some of the characteristics of a task and yet not be fully tasks? And I think that is the case. You will find some activities that seem to be halfway between an exercise and a task. And you might want to think about how you can redesign exercises in your textbook to introduce a gap and a purpose for communicating, to turn them into tasks. Okay, so tasks obviously lie at the center of task-based language teaching. So what is task-based language teaching? Well, the best way to think about it is how it differs from traditional language teaching. And I think there are two main ways. In task-based language teaching, there's no attempt to teach specific bits and pieces of language, such as specific grammatical structures or a set of vocabulary items, etc. There's no specification of the language that is to be taught or learned. And the idea, in fact, is that learners will simply learn naturally by performing the tasks. And the second difference is the kind of syllabus that you have in task-based language teaching. In traditional language teaching, the syllabus typically consists of a list of grammatical structures, or perhaps language functions, or perhaps vocabulary items, which specify the language that is to be taught. But in task-based language teaching, there's no specification of the language to be taught. There's simply a task-based syllabus, which is a list of tasks that the students will be asked to perform. Okay, so that should give you a pretty clear idea of what task-based language teaching is. Another way of looking at the difference is to think about what are the objectives of a traditional and a task-based lesson. And I've given an example of a typical objective for a traditional lesson and an example of an objective for a task-based lesson. In a traditional lesson, the objective will typically state the language that is to be taught and learned. In a task-based lesson, in fact, the only objective is what they have to do in order to do the task. So the objective for the spot the difference task that we looked at a moment ago would be students will talk together, find the 5 differences in 2 pictures when they cannot see each other's picture. So if you're doing task-based lessons, you construct objectives like that. No attempt is made to specify what language learners will learn. And in fact, we do hope that learners are going to learn language through doing the tasks. But it's very likely that different learners in the classroom will learn different things as a result of performing tasks. I want to talk a little bit about one of the attempts to develop a task-based approach. This was called the Communicational Language Teaching Project, and it was carried out in India in the 1980s and 1990s. It was one of the very first attempts to actually introduce a task-based approach. And it was carried out in normal state schools with quite large classes, with learners who were relatively beginners. Perhaps we could describe them as post-beginners. So the syllabus for the Communicational Language Teaching Project drew on topics that the students were familiar with. For example, simple diagrams that they would be familiar with, clock faces, calendars, school timetables, maps, money, rules, and distances. So in other words, tasks were developed, tasks that conform to my 4 criteria were developed based on those particular topics. For each topic, in fact, there are a number of different tasks, and these were sequenced from easy to difficult. And here's an example for school timetables. So the easiest task was where the students were given a blank timetable, and then the teacher simply described what they had to put into the timetable, gave descriptions and instructions and they filled in the timetable according to what the teacher told them. A slightly more difficult task involved them comparing timetables to identify the frequency of lessons in the different subjects. So they might be given timetables of 4 different classes, and they had to work out how many lessons were typically given for English, for maths, for physical education, etc. And then finally, a more difficult one is that they were again given a set of timetables, and this time they had to work out a teacher's timetable by looking at the different class timetables, etc. So in this project, the teachers made no attempt to specify the language needed to perform each task. They simply performed the tasks and let the language emerge naturally and spontaneously as the task was performed. So I thought it would be interesting to actually look at what kind of language occurred when a teacher was performing one of these tasks. And here you have an example. This is a lesson that is based on a timetable. So the teacher starts with a question. Listen, the first period after lunch on Tuesday is geography. The first period after lunch on Tuesday is geography. And then the teacher waits to see if the students put their hands up to come to the front and write geography in the correct place in the timetable. The teacher's got a blank timetable on the board. And so it goes on with the teacher, if you like, scaffolding the student's performance through this particular task, sometimes giving quite a lot of help. So, for example, Mubarak comes to the front and wants to write in geography, but is uncertain of the spelling. So the teacher helps out and gives him the spelling. And you can see that the teacher asks questions, and then the teacher tries to sort of scaffold the learner's production of the answer to the questions, etc. Okay. Now, I think this activity conforms to my definition of a task, and it shows you the kind of language that can take place. So here are some more reflection questions. How important do you think it is to tell the students what the linguistic objective of a lesson is? Remember, in traditional language teaching, you do tell the students what the linguistic objective of the lesson is, but in task-based teaching, there is no linguistic objective, so nothing to tell them. And then you might want to look at the example of the teacher performing a task and what language might the students learn by listening to the teacher. We don't know what language they learn, but they may incidentally pick up some language. Well, one thing is that they might pick up how to spell the word geography. They might also work out how to actually specify the time period of one period on the timetable, 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2:45, 2:45, that's what I said. So they might learn how to actually talk about time or periods of time, etc. We don't know if they will do that, but there's an opportunity for them to do it. So far, I have been talking about task-based language teaching, but there is another use of tasks, and that is in task-supported language teaching. Because tasks have had a place in traditional language teaching based on a structural syllabus. That is a syllabus listing the grammar structures or vocabulary to be taught. And when we use tasks in this kind of teaching, we talk about task-supported language teaching. So one very common traditional teaching approach is PPP, presentation, practice, production. Presentation is where you present the language that is to be learned, that is to be taught. And then there is practice using exercises. And then in the final P, the production stage, there's the opportunity to try to use the language that has been taught in a communicative way. And that's where tasks come in. Tasks come in the final P of the PPP stage, in the production stage. So that's task-supported language teaching, and that is a somewhat different use of tasks. In task-supported language teaching, you need a particular type of task, because you want the task to provide opportunities for students to practice what you've been teaching them. And so this calls for a focus task. And there is my definition. A focus task is designed in such a way as to elicit the use of the particular structure that is being targeted. So in other words, you design a task so that it makes it natural or even essential for the students to actually use the target structure communicatively while they're doing the task. So if you take the things in pocket task, which I showed you earlier, sorry, I haven't. This is another task, things in pocket task. This was a task, a focus task, that was designed to encourage the use of modal verbs might, may, must, to express different degrees of probability. So and here is what happened in the task, so you can have a look at it. The teacher lays out some objects in front of the student. She explains that the objects came from the pocket of a coat that she had found left on the bus that she was traveling to work on that day. So she puts all the objects out on the desk. And then she asks the students to get into groups. And the task that they're given is to think what the person is. And then they have to complete the person. So this will lead them to potentially use verbs like, he must be a man because there's a pipe, and usually men smoke pipes, etc. When the person who designed this particular task used it with a class, however, she found that the students did not actually use the modal verbs, might, may, must, that instead they used the lexical items, possible, probable, and certain. And so she stopped the task halfway through, and she she gave an explanation to the students about the meaning of may, might, must, etc., and how they related to the ideas of possible, probable, certain, etc. So she did introduce some explicit direct instruction. But in this particular lesson, she didn't actually start off with it. She first of all let them do the task, and then when she saw there was a problem, then she came in with the explicit instruction. Again, we don't have time to do this, but you might want to think about this yourself. Can you think of a focus task for practicing the prepositions in, on, and at in time expressions? Now remember, if it's a task, it must satisfy my 4 criteria. Focus tasks are the same as any other kind of task, unfocused tasks. They must satisfy the 4 criteria. So can you think of a task that will make it natural, useful, essential for the students to use in, on, and at while they're doing the task, while they're focused on meaning, while there's a gap, while they're using their own linguistic resources and in order to achieve a communicative outcome? There are problems with focused tasks, and this is what this slide tells you about. One problem is that if students know that they are supposed to be using a particular grammatical structure, say, that they will end up not really communicating properly, but simply practicing the grammatical structure. And so it may result in very stilted, careful use of language rather than genuine, spontaneous communication. And another problem is that it's very difficult to design focus tasks. As I've just pointed out, the things in Pockets task was designed to give learners the opportunity to use modal verbs of possibility, but in fact, they didn't use them. And that's one of the problems, because they're not told that they should use them. They're going to use whatever linguistic resources they have. And so they might not use it, etc. So focus tasks have their problems. So what are your own views about the relative merits of task-based teaching and task-supported language teaching? In which approach do you think is best suited to your own teaching situation? Why? These are really the key questions. And I'll stop there and leave this slide up with the questions. Okay, this is an opportunity for you to ask any questions relating to my short presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. You can stop sharing your screen. And actually, I'm following the comments, and I can see one question from Georgia, Ms. Tamar Delidze. She asked, she'd like to ask you if TBL has undergone any changes or adaptation in the digital classroom.
No, well, not really, because the essential principles of task-based language teaching can be applied to the face-to-face classroom or can be applied to the digital classroom. I think the digital classroom does give an opportunity for a greater variety of tasks to be performed. One key issue in the digital classroom is whether the communication is face-to-face, whether the communication is done orally or whether it is done in writing in, say, a chat room. And there have been studies that have investigated that. Another development that the digital classroom makes possible is that I think it's easier to string tasks together in a series as part of a project. So to think up a project and then to implement the project in terms of a series of tasks that will help the students to achieve the project. And I think it's somewhat easier to do that in a digital classroom than it is in a face-to-face classroom, although not impossible in a face-to-face classroom.
Yeah, thank you very much. And to be honest, we don't have any more questions, as I can see. Just only thank you very much for your presentation.
Not at all. You are very, very welcome. All right. Well, it's quite late here. I know that you are in Ukraine or Azerbaijan.
Right.
Yeah, to be honest, we have participants from more than 25 countries. And
right. So maybe I should conclude by telling you where I am, because I didn't. I'm actually in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Great.
Right.
Great.
And New Zealand is now 25 to 9 p.m. In other words, it's nearly my bedtime. And so
Thank you very much.
I need to say
thank you very much.
Night to you. All right.
Night.
Okay, so all the best. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, let's continue.
Yeah,
so it was quite useful presentation, really.
Definitely it was.
To Professor Rod Ellis.
Yeah, and meanwhile, I'd like to welcome and, say thank you to absolutely all participants that could really join to this event on this Sunday. So I see familiar names, of course, Tamar from Georgia, Tamuna, Pinar, Olga, and everybody. Thank you very much. Let's go on. Let's continue.
Yeah. So I'd like to announce our next presenter, Dr. Paul Robertson. Dr. Paul Robertson founded the Asian EFL Journal of Academic Research Journals in 1999. Over 759 academic editors and over 4,000 research articles have been published since its inception, covering all areas of second language acquisition. In 1999, the TESOL Journal Group began running teacher training courses in conjunction with the research findings. Paul Robertson founded and owns the TESOL Asia brand, which has now moved into TESOL Academy. And Over 2,600 teachers have graduated from this TESOL course, and I should tell you that we also have our graduates from Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Iran, Georgia, Jamaica, Nigeria. They are graduates from exactly this TESOL course.
Great Britain as well.
Yeah. Hello and welcome.
Yeah, hi Eva. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can see and hear you. Hi, Paul.
We
Nice
had a bit of a drama. We had a bit of a drama. I had to get my daughter's computer. The other one failed. So, and I thought I was going to be the third speaker, but there you go. I thought Debbie was next.
All right. Okay, not that much worries. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as Eva mentioned, we've got participants from more than 25 countries, with even more than 500 registrations. So some of the participants, they are going to watch this on YouTube later on because of the time difference. So here we go.
I think this comes to you, Seema and Eva. You're actually a very popular and famous company, and I've known you for a long time. You're doing a fantastic job across all of Europe and probably into the Middle East. I'm not sure how far you go nowadays.
To be honest, everywhere.
Everywhere now.
Well, you're not here in the Philippines. I'm in the Philippines. That's one place you're not. Anyway, this is the Philippines. It's 4:30 in the afternoon on a very rainy, stormy day. Rod, it's interesting. Okay, there's just a cover of our
Should
the journal.
I add it to the screen, or you'd like it to be here later?
Okay, I mean, my email is tesol@tesol.one. That's pretty simple. I like that. And just the cover of some of we have 9 journals now, which I'll come to in a minute. Way back in 1997, when I started TESOL training with Rod Ellis, this was in Busan, South Korea. And it's interesting, his first lecture was on task-based teaching in 1997. And boy, I mean, he's changed his talk over, I don't know, how many years is that? Over the last 2 decades, he's upgraded his speech. Today, he researches it inside out, and there's new elements today that it's totally different to what it was in 1997. But studying under him was very, very stressful, as you can imagine. We young learners and Professor Ellis, but he's brilliant on task-based teaching, and I think a lot of the teachers who I can see on the right-hand side would probably implement this in the classroom. Although this is my experience, task-based teaching needs a lot of preparation and a lot of time. And I also find the teachers on my right-hand screen might agree or disagree. I find task-based teaching really depends on the culture you are teaching to. For example, we know in the Philippines and in South Korea, where I live, task-based teaching is very, very successful. It also appears to be very successful in Indonesia, 2 countries where we can't use it. It's culturally not acceptable. Is over in the Middle East, across Saudi, and also down into Vietnam. So, I mean, there's kind of a caveat on where you do task-based teaching. But for the people on the right-hand side, I mean, do read up on it. I mean, try and find a modern book, because what I learned today, was far different from what he taught me in 1997. I feel like a brand new student. That was just a little bit on task-based teaching, which was off the track. I just wanted to, I'm talking generally for about 10 or 15 minutes before Daddy, one of my chief editors, comes in. I want to talk about our profession, really, where our profession has been. We're only a very young profession, and where are we going? There's 90 million teachers of English across the world. Think of that. It's a huge, we're one of the biggest, we are the biggest sort of organization job-wise, and we know that there's 2 billion students. So when you think about it, we have a massive empire, and I think we have a lot of work to do to take it to the next level. let me go back. Let me go back to the beginning. I mean, I was born a long time ago in the Korean War, 1950. Then my first profession came out of, I was in the Vietnam War as a paramedic, actually in the war. So my first profession after 1972 was in the medical. Then I transitioned to the legal world. And then 1993, I accidentally started teaching in Greece, not far from you guys, actually. And my first experience going into, it was a young learners class. My first experience in Greece going to a young learners class was almost worse than being in the war zone. My God, I came out shaking. It was terrifying for me. I wasn't TESOL trained. I wasn't trained to be a teacher, but I quickly did a CELTA in Greece to try and learn about teaching. So that's how my career started. And then in 1997, this is where I met Rod Ellis in Busan, South Korea. I'd left Greece and I'd become actually the president of TESOL in Korea. And we decided to have a conference. As you can imagine, I didn't know what I was doing, but surrounded by very good people. And Rod Ellis came to that conference and talked on task-based teaching. That's how we began. And soon after, we opened the TESOL course in South Korea for the expats and the Koreans. At that stage, the TESOL course was called the Asian EFL Journal TESOL course, which was the name of my first academic journal, which started publishing in about 1999. And I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the old Asian EFL Journal. That came about because I'd written my thesis in about 1998 and none of the publishers would publish me, so I was very annoyed. So I opened my own journal online. And as Eva said, I mean, from 1999, we've gone to 9 journals. I think we're touching on 800 editors now. The publication rate is astronomical. And if any of you guys out there listening are in the world of academia and you'd like to volunteer your services as editors, I'd love to hear from you. I mean, we have 700 or 800, but an editor's job, as you can imagine, is very intense. So that was how I started. And this is the important thing. In 1997, my late friend, Peter said to me, Paul, whatever you do in the world of TESOL, don't reinvent the wheel. And that's what I'm afraid we've been doing for so long. If you read all the research, and I'm going back into the days of Professor Krashen, say 1985, when I believe our profession started, he made those wonderful pronouncements. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. Followed by in the 1990s, Professor Ellis, and I think maybe you are familiar with his principles of second language acquisition, his 10 principles. If you haven't read them, please go online and read them. Absolutely vital for every language teacher to know Professor Ellis's principles. The point is, our profession is young, so we can't go back 2,000 years like law or medicine that I was previously in for research. We're only going back to Professor Krashen. So we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. The point that worries me is that if we know there's millions of teachers, but how are we going to do the training? How do we keep the teachers up to date? There's about 70 language journals I'm aware of publishing every month. Teachers and academics, teachers do not have time. Teachers are so busy, you don't really have time to read 8,000 words or 10 articles. Professor Maley from London said a few years ago, he said the problem with our profession is that we academics, we research the latest research, which takes 2 years to get published. But the teachers in the classroom need the answers here and now. That's the difference. I can research and publish 2 years later, but in the classroom, I have to make a decision on the spot about, the correct way of doing the class, or error correction, which is a complete new field, of course, error correction. So the classroom teacher has a mammoth task, and one of my challenges and concerns is how do we get the latest information to the classroom teacher? And that's, I think, one of the problems I'd like to rapidly tackle in the next 6 months with SR's help, for example. There's got to be some way that, I mean, there's some brilliant research that came out last week we published. I read it, maybe 200 academics read it, but 80 million teachers haven't seen it and won't see it. You can see the dilemma between research and actual in the classroom. I think, this is my thinking, I think the profession's come a long way, but I think there's one thing we've got to do now. I mean, same Eva, you're running great TESOL courses across that part of the world. We're running TESOL courses across Asia, Indonesia, China, Japan, this region. But I feel there's a missing element. And it goes back to my medical days. I think we've got a lot of great information to teaching, but now the neurologists and the neuroscientists are finding a lot of information I think we need to build into our training courses. For not heavy medical stuff, but just the findings. For example, recently in Singapore, neurological studies now prove what Professor Krashen said in 1985 is correct. This is the sort of thing I think we have to bring out. Recent research in Japan, I say recent within the last few years, on sleep cycles and language learning and brain activity, neuronal activity. Actually, very good research shows that if you don't get to the fifth REM, R-E-M, you know REM, the learning from the previous day is lost very quickly, which basically means, as we know, get a good night's sleep. But in Asia, students do not get a good night's sleep. As you know, they study. But just small medically based facts that suit our profession. And same out, I think in our future courses, our TESOL courses, I'd like to run a module where we introduce the medical findings that support what we're learning, such as Professor Ellis teaches us the principles of language acquisition. A small step, but I think a very important step. What other notes have I got here? I'm thinking way into the future now. We academics, we teachers, we study a TESOL certificate. We talk about professional development, but in my opinion, we are very good professionals already. You know, we're caring, we're dedicated, we're in the classroom. And I'm just not keen on this word, let's do a TESOL certificate or professional development, when I feel that we're so far above. Okay, there's my 4-year-old giving a wave to me. So I'm hoping that over the next few months we can come up with some ideas that elevate. I mean, teachers don't need a TESOL certificate, they need the next step into the future. And for example, the future, this is the year, 2021? Now by 2030, I've seen in Shanghai and I've seen in Singapore, artificial intelligence teachers, artificial AI teachers who teach. So if you go to, I have a website called TESOL.University, TESOL.University. It's not a university, it's a website, and luckily I control at TESOL University. I have a link to a New Zealand AI company where you can actually start communicating with AI just like you are in a Q&A session with me. And it's a little bit scary because I see that AI as a teacher. And I think this is the sort of thing we need to think about now, not in 10 years' time. You know, will AI replace us or will AI assist us? My view is AI will assist us, but let's think about it. Small steps like that. Here in the Philippines, I don't know if any of the listeners, any of the viewers on the right-hand side are into publishing or trying to get published, but these days you have to publish in elite journals to either get a contract or keep your contract or get promotion, which is incredibly stressful for the academics. Getting published, it's the most stressful thing in the world. I can't think of anything more stressful than getting published. Actually, the next speaker, Dedi, is going to talk about this. But I think as part of our TESOL course, SAMAD, in the future, and given there are so many academics coming into the course, I think we need to also include a module on elements of getting published in elite journals. Let's break away from the old tradition and, jump into the future. AI, publishing, neurolinguistics. Let's advance our world. One thing I'm doing here in the Philippines, which is where I live with my large Filipino family, and it's worked here. I don't know if you can bring up my MS Word, SAMAD, the card on the back page. Are you able to bring that up onto the screen or not?
Now I can see your screen. Would you like me to bring on the screen the paper you
I
see?
can't bring it on my screen because I changed computer, and the computer, which is dead, has got the... I sent it to you in an email. Look, wait on.
Yeah, do you mean that PDF file?
The PDF file.
Yeah, 1 second, I'm doing that.
If you can't find it, I've got a sample here, which I'll just hold.
Can you see it on the screen now?
Oh, that's it. Next page. Next page.
Yes, please.
I don't know if you can see in the center is a card. And in the Philippines, I can't read it on my computer because it's too small, but it says professional academic designation. That's for academics. Teachers is professional TESOL teacher designation. Basically, the teachers or academics go to a website, and the back end, they fill in about 100 questions about their academic background, their teaching experience, and also their community service experience, their whole life. And it comes up with a code at the end. There's 10 levels. If you see this, I've given myself some exquisite title like Grand Educator or something. But this is what we're using in the Philippines. It's been accepted by the government. So maybe, this will get across the world. Instead of relying on publication to get a promotion, this card is the academic or the teacher's life history, which is provable. It's verified. For example, there's 10 levels. You might come in level 8 or 9, which is, and there's also something called a TIF, TIF, Teacher Impact Factor, or a PIF, Professional Impact Factor, which goes to your community work. And so this is also now being looked at by the government in Indonesia. It's sort of more intense than just writing one paper and getting published. So this is just another step into the future. It might work, it might not, but we've got to give everything a try. I think that's about it for me. SAMAD and Eva, it's always great to see you guys. You do a fantastic job, and in the future, doing some more courses, but let's be creative and add a few more elements, and whether it's a 120-hour TESOL certificate or whether we give it a more advanced name, let's do that.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely.
I think it's time for that. I think it's time for.
There was a question again from Mr. Martelidze. What is the key to get published in high-impact journals in EFL?
That's $1 million question. I think I'll write a book and make $1 million. The key is find something that hasn't been researched before, or find something that you've seen is researched, but you see a gap. They've missed something. You know, for example, Professor Ellis says PPP is the best way to teach English, an example. And you might say, well, hang on, Professor Ellis missed a point. Let's examine, let's interview, research, 20, 30, 40, 50 students, come up with a methodology, how we're going to do it, and write a paper. Don't write something which has been written about already. I mean, every day we get about between 20, the most was 80, between 20 and 80 papers a day, good papers from across the world. And I guarantee that when I read them, I've already read this many, many times before. There's no gap. But in our profession, I mean, there are gaps everywhere. We're an evolving profession. Start with something known, then be brave, take a plunge and say, the culture, for example, the culture of Azerbaijan, ABCD, means that whatever Professor Ellis said cannot apply. And then statistically, you come up with your results. Don't don't write something, for example, Professor Robertson disagreed with Professor Ellis on task-based teaching. Well, that's I can read that, you can read that. So what? You would have to say that two professors disagreed, but they're both wrong or both failed to take into account the following 3 or 4 points which you research. So really, your abstract will either make or break you. That's what every editor, that's where we start. If there's something in the abstract, only 5, 6, 7, 8 sentences that catches their attention, that will go into full review. So, and it's extremely difficult to get published, but you just got to keep trying, look for that gap.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Paul.
I think
we do hope to see you during our TESOL course. We're about to start, right? Absolutely newly designed TESOL 120-hour course. And by the way, Paul Robertson is going to be one of the trainers of the course, right? So we'll announce about the course details a bit later for those who would like to participate in those courses. So thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks,
that was
Emma.
really fun. And
and thanks. It's great to see you guys. I look forward to the next lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Take care. All the best.
Yeah, and it's high time to announce our next presenter, Dedi Sanchai. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I mean the last name. So what I'd like you to know, Dedi says that the English language is the language of the world. And English teachers have changed their methods of delivery over the years to suit the present scenario. Dedi highlights that nowadays we should be aware of specific popular and efficient ways of teaching the English language that fulfills the demand of modern learners. Dedi is the chief editor of the Southeast Asia Language Teaching and Learning, which is a double-blind, peer-reviewed international journal dedicated to promoting scholarly exchange among teachers and researchers in the field of language teaching. So let me welcome Dedi. Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Dedi. Hope you're okay.
Thank you very much for the invitations.
Okay, nice to have you here.
So let's get started. Let's get down to business.
So I'd like to share my slide first. Hopefully that it works.
Yeah, I can see your screen. You can open your presentation in the presentation mode.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see your screen, but I can't see your presentation.
Now?
Yeah, please put it in the presentation mode. Yeah, that's it.
Okay,
Here we
well,
go. Good luck with your
okay, well,
presentation.
right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good evening to everyone. For the first, I would like to say thank you so much to SR Teaching and Learning, and then also TESOL Academy for the invitations to share something about the flipped learning instructions. Okay, so this is a little bit about me. Now I'm teaching in Malaysia and then as a research management center manager in University College of ASN Pahang, Malaysia. And this is my email and this is my WhatsApp number in case you need some information after my presentations. Okay, well, talking about flipped learning, I'm sure this is not something new for you, and everybody has what we call it a knowledge about the flipped learning. But actually, in TESOL Academy, of course, that we are now moved to see the demands of the what we call it prospective participants or maybe students for the TESOL Academy. We have to mix between teaching, practice, and then also research, and then also publications nowadays because this is the trend. Okay, but before going to discuss more about that, I would like to explain on why the flipped learning is important nowadays, especially for the turbulent times. Because now we are in the pandemic. Not only pandemics, actually, the issue it is about another issue as well, like Wi-Fi, internet connections, and then also there are so many things. Maybe some poor countries that they cannot afford for the high technology. So this is actually that why I bring this issue, and then why I bring this flipped learning actually into the e-learning that will be beneficial for the teachers as well. Okay, so we can see that our students nowadays, they are Z generations. We can say the Gen Z. They are born 96 to 2010, and then you can see that the way we communicate with them is actually using social media and SMS, right? So that's why they are familiar with Facebook, they are familiar with Instagram, Twitter, and then so many. Okay, related to the social media and SMS. So this is actually that our students nowadays. Okay, so and then mostly the teachers now and then also the lecturers is coming from Gen Y and then also Gen X, of course. And then I myself is Gen Y, and then I'm still using the social media and SMS, but the Gen X teachers maybe they are still familiar with the email and text message only. So if the Gen X teaching the Gen Z, so maybe there is a gap that need to fill. And then the Gen Y, of course, that maybe they can still adapt to the Gen Z. But it is okay. It is just only the theory and then also assume based on the research. But practically, some of the Gen X as well, they are very familiar with the technology because they are maybe in that study. Okay, but what we want to jot down is actually about the Gen Z that we need to see and then we need to fulfill the demands of our students itself. So it means that to make our teaching and learning what we call it will not be bored, of course, and then they like to attend our class and so on. So this is maybe the things that we need to think about our students in Gen Z. Okay, and then that's the issue of the Z generations. But nowadays, the issue, we are in the pandemic. Everybody using virtual class. Maybe some countries, they already open for the offline class, but especially for in Malaysia, we are not open yet. So we are still using Zoom or maybe Google Meet and so in every virtual classroom. And then the students sometimes, they just on the video and then they sleep. That's what happened. We didn't know actually whether they are attending our class or not. And sometimes we end up like we are speaking alone, and then nobody listens to us. When you react to the students, and nobody listens to you, nobody answers your questions. So that's what happened nowadays in the online or maybe virtual learning. Okay, so this is not only happened in Malaysia, I'm sure, but it is of course maybe happening in the other countries. maybe we are already in the virtual learning. We know how to use the Zoom, and we know how to use Google Meet. We know how to use StreamYard and so on. But the thing is, it is really efficient or not? Is it really engage the students to what we call it to participate in our class, in the virtual class itself? Okay, so this is maybe the things that the background that why we need some suitable or maybe relevant techniques or methodology to teach. Okay, um, I like the what we call it. Thomas Brown said, "There is no the best methodology in this world. The best methodology is means that the relevant or the suitable methodology to teach to the students." So that's maybe the things that we have to think. We know that the flipped learning is actually was established and then maybe was introduced to the teachers in the world. It is about like 2004, right? But we can see that at the time it is like it's offline learning, and then also it is actually the practice of the flipped learning. It is combinations of the online learning and then also with the offline learning. But now, how are we going to bring this flipped learning to the virtual or e-learning that we are facing nowadays in our daily teaching and learning process? So this is the things that maybe we need to discuss about in my presentations. Okay, let's see the basic, what we call it, fundamental definitions of the flipped learning itself, or the flipped classroom. Maybe some of the people, they know that it is a flipped classroom, but I may say that this is a flipped learning. So it is a form of learning that makes use of technology to make learning in virtual classroom easier and more comfortable, and in that way, give teachers the opportunity to save all class time into teacher-students interactions instead of lecturing. Okay, and then you know that even though that we are now using a virtual learning, so it means that we are still using the Prof. Ellis said that PPP. It means that presentations, practice, and so on. So that's the things that it means that we are still lecturing the students using virtual. So that's what happened. Maybe the students will get bored and then they will close the video and then they just sleep at home and then they just on the video, okay, the camera. So that's what happened actually. Okay, and then if you see that flipped learning is a pedagogical approach in which direct instructions moves from the group learning space to individual learning space. And the resulting group space is transformed into dynamic, interactive learning environment where the educator guides students as they apply concept and engage creatively in the subject matter. So it means that previously that in the group, we are giving them lecturing. It means that in the class, right? We're giving them lecturing and so on, blah, 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 blah. And after that, you will give them homework, right? You will give them homework and then they will do it at home. And they will think about it and bring it to the class again and discuss again. So this is in the traditional. But in the flipped learning that we have to change something with flipped. It means that in a simple way, you can say that simple concept of the flipped learning is lecture at home and homework in virtual class. So we flip it. So on how are we going to flip it? So maybe this is the things that we are discussing in our presentations today. Hopefully that maybe some of you, maybe you have your own experience on how you implement the flipped learning in your class. Okay, so this is in traditional, actually. Lectures, we give them, we present, and then we give them homework. But in the flipped learning itself, lectures, they do it at home before coming to the class. But in the class, it's just only class activities. It means for that to give information or to give knowledge about the subject that you are going to teach to them. So this is in flipped learning. And the flipped learning instructions, the philosophy behind the flipped is that actually lecturers can spend time working with the students who need their help in the classroom, and students can work together to solve problems rather than sitting home alone with work they might not understand with nobody to ask for help. So that's what happened in the traditional, what we call it, classroom. It means that we are giving them the knowledge. It means that the understanding and then also the remember level in the Bloom's taxonomy in the class, and then we are giving them homework at home, and then at home they don't have anybody to discuss with, and we assume that they can solve by themselves. This is what happens in the traditional classroom. Maybe there is what we call benefit, but there is disadvantage as well. Okay, and then in the flipped learning, so we have that what we call it the low level of the Bloom's taxonomy. It has been done at home before coming into the class. So in class, actually, we are more to the high level of the Bloom's taxonomy. So it means that the students will be more activities, fun, and then also maybe they already understand what they have been discussing in the class before coming into the class, because they have already watched it, maybe, or because they have already learned it at home. So this is actually the flipped learning. It means the philosophy behind the flipped teaching itself. Okay. And actually, in the flipped learning, there are four what we call it pillars of the flipped learning. For the first, we call it a flexible environment. So in the flipped learning, the variety of the learning mode, support group work or independent study, flexible spaces, okay, a flexible assessment, it means that they can learn anywhere, anytime they want before coming to the class. This is in the flexible environment. It means in order for them to know the knowledge, they can watch it. They can access to the knowledge anywhere and anytime they want. So this should be flexible environment. And then the other things is learning culture, a learner-centered approach. It means that it should be a student-centered approach. It's not a lecturer-centered approach. It should be from the students itself. Class time is explore topics in depth. So in class time, there is no more what we call it lecturing. So it's more to activities, and then also more to explore more about the topic. Okay, so this is actually in the what we call it a flipped learning itself for the learning culture. And then the other thing is intentional content. Concept understanding is more important than procedural. It means that we want to make that the students actually think about that they need that. So they need the topic, and then they want to learn it, and they are what we call engaged with the topic, and they like it, and then they like it because of they need it. So this is actually that we want that is meaningful to them, right? So the learning process is meaningful to them. So this is actually in the flipped learning. And then in order to do that, it means that we have to get a professional educators. Professional educators, and then you can see here the last technology savvy. It means that we have to be what we get professional enough, giving feedback to them. It means if you are giving them homework, because sometimes that what we call it, you ask the students to do homework, or maybe you have to do activity, but you didn't give feedback. It means that there is nothing to do with that, and there is no way to improve the student's ability or maybe capability on that. So that's the things. So you have to be professional enough, and then technology savvy. For nowadays, you have to be technology savvy as educators. I mean, you have to know how to use virtual apps, for example, Zoom, Google Meet, and the other things that maybe you know, right? WebEx. So there are so many things that in that what we call flipped learning. Okay, so those of the what we called the pillars for the flipped learning itself is a flexible environment, a learning culture, intentional content, and then also professional educators. So in order for you to fulfill that, we call that activity is a flipped learning. So you have to see these four pillars that you can apply to your own teaching and learning in every day. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so this is actually, I just want to compare again between the old and then also the new, or maybe the flipped learning instructions itself. So before the flip, okay, before we call it the students, so it means students read our materials, okay, and then students listen to the lecturer in the classroom, and then student attempt to do homework. This is what happened in our traditional classroom. But in the flipped learning, it means the students watch a video that's related to the topic. They learn about that, okay, and after that in the class is only more on how to apply the concept in the classroom. More activities and then more discussions and then in-depth topics. So that should be in the class. And then after the class, it is more to extend the knowledge of the students. So this is maybe the difference between traditional and the flipped learning. And if you see here that in the traditional model, we tend to give this remember and understanding. This is the low level of the Bloom taxonomy. It is remember and understand. So we do it in the class. It's the same thing now. You do it in a virtual class. You meet with the students. You are still giving presentation, lecturing, giving to them, okay, for example, you are explaining about tenses. So you explain to them, this is a present tense, this is all the things, this is the rule, and blah, 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 blah. So this more all to remember and understand, right? And then outside of the class, in the traditional, you are giving them homework in order for them to apply or to analyze that the topics, right? And then this will happen, right? And then, but in the flipped learning, we flip it. It means that the students already got this understand or remember, understand. It is outside of the class before start the class. And then in the class, you are more doing apply and analyze, evaluate, and create. It means that you are doing activity, more in-depth discussions with the students in the class. So it means that there are two-way instructions, you and the student and students with students. So this is actually that if you see that the Bloom's taxonomy in the flipped classroom or the flipped learning itself. So the versus traditional and flipped model. So this is actually, as I said to you, of course, that this is an offline class, but when it is in the nowadays that we are virtual class or digital class, so it means that how we going to apply this flipped learning. So this is maybe important to us to know because we are now facing these situations and conditions, right? Okay, so the other issue actually maybe it's not only the Z generations they are engaged with the technology, and then also the students are not really what we call it. They don't like the way the lecturers may be presenting in the what we call it in the Zoom or maybe in the digital, something like that. But the other things, the other issue is about some of the countries, maybe 4 countries, or maybe they don't have access to the internet. So maybe that's one of the issue as well that we are facing now for the what we call it virtual class. But so that's why how are we going to what we call it to fulfill these demands and then also to answer this problem and to give solution for this problem. For me, maybe the practical approach to the e-learning, that's maybe one way that we are going to do. So for me, in order for us to do the flip the e-learning process, of course that maybe there is no perfect tools that we are going to what we could facilitate this flip e-learning. But I'm sure that you have your idea based on my explanations and then on how are you going to apply it to your own teaching learning process. So for me, I would like to divide it the activities on how we're going to implement the flip e-learning procedure in your own daily teaching. So the first is you have to plan. Okay. For the first, what is the plan that you have to make? For the first, look at the topic, content, and materials that you have, and lesson plan. What are they? Right? And after that, in order for you to give them the knowledge, to transfer the knowledge, the information that you are going to give them, so it means that you can make a video yourself or take it from any sources. It doesn't necessarily that you should make video of yourself. You can take it from the outside. It will be okay as well, no problem. Okay, but please make sure that it is covering the topics that you are going to teach. For example, you are maybe giving a topic for descriptive text or descriptive writing. So in that video, right, you can record yourself on how to explain the descriptive writing. And then, but don't forget to create an online quiz based on that video. Okay, based on the video that you are creating, or maybe the video that you take from another sources like YouTube or TED and so on, and then make a quiz based on that video. It means that this is to measure the understanding of the students, whether they watch the video and then also they answer the questions, whether they got it, understand the topic or not. So you can see based on the quiz. Okay, so it means that you have already prepared that, the materials for them to get the level of that remember and then also understanding in the Bloom taxonomy. And after you have done with that, right? So it is the time for you to share. You have to upload the video in your own, what we call it, platform. Let's say that maybe online platform. Nowadays, maybe familiar online platform like Google Classroom. So you can upload the video there and inform the students to watch the video. And after they watch the video, they have to answer the quiz, right? They have to answer the quiz, and then you have to give the specific time when they have to answer the quiz, right? And then the things that I need to inform you, it means that 1 week before the class, or maybe 4 days before the class, you have already made a plan and you have already got the video and then also the quizzes, right? And then you upload it to your online platform, okay, online class platform. And after that, you make it accessible to the students. And 3 days before the class, the schedule or the timetable of your class, so it means that the students already got the materials. They can watch it anytime, anywhere, and any places they want during the 3 days, right? So it means that when they are maybe, they don't have internet at home, so they can go to the other places. Maybe they have internet, so they can watch it there, and they can answer that, okay? Or maybe they don't want directly to answer the quiz. They want to watch it many times about the video. So in order for them to understand more and more, so in order for them to know how to answer the quizzes. So this should be the before class. So it means that before class is already done. It means that the low level of the Bloom taxonomy, it is remember, and then also the understanding is already done before the class. So after that, during the class, okay, so now you have a future class with the students. Future class, it means that it should be in-depth discussions and then also exercise and discussions online and virtual. You have many, you should know many platforms that you can use to engage the students, okay, for their in-depth discussions, or maybe in-depth understanding, or in-depth explore about the topics, right? You can use maybe a game or critical thinking games, like maybe you can use Kahoot, you can use quizzes, you can use, there are so many apps that you can use for that in-depth discussions. And then you have maybe critical questions to the students, and then in order for them to discuss within the team, and then also give their opinion related to that. So it means that you have in-depth discussion in class. So make them engage and then also interact with you, and then also interact with the others. Students with students, students, teachers, teachers, students. So the class will be what we call it live, and then the students really like it. So this is actually that in the class, because if you want to do all those things, start from remember, understanding, applying, analyzing, all the things in the class, I don't think so it will be enough time for us to do all those things in the class. Because in some countries, maybe they have an issue of the credit hours. For example, in Malaysia, maybe for the credit hours, we have only 45 minutes for 1 credit hours. And then normally class will be 2 credit hours. And it's only 90 minutes to cover all those things, that from remember until to the creating. So it means that we don't have enough time. That's why maybe one live learning, this way of things that maybe can apply to the students, so the students will be engaged more. And then I'm sure if you have this kind of activities with the students, and then interact with the students, nobody will close their video or camera during the virtual itself. Okay. Okay. So next, after the class, it means that after the class, so it is more to review and revise. It means that you have to see which students is very active, and then which students is not active, and then what is their problem. So it's more to know about our students as well. And then we give them another things that we give them extended learning. It means that we give them some topics that related to the topic we are discussing to explore more. But this is not homework, but it's to explore more. Maybe some students, they like to learn about that, but some are not. But this is actually is not to make them stressed and frustrated about that, but it is to what we call to extend their knowledge. If they like it, so of course they will explore about that. Okay, so this is actually the maybe the way that maybe can apply in your country and then in our countries. That's the brief e-learning procedure that we can use. So back in your mind that it means that if you want to apply the brief learning, of course you are thinking about your students, what the technology they have. Do they have maybe smartphone? Do they have laptop at home and so on? Do they have Wi-Fi? So think about it. So you have to think about before the class, and after that, what is the activity that's suitable to engage them during the class, in future class? Of course, this is challenging, but that's the thing that we want, what we call it, the creative teachers to do that. And after the class, you have to review, revise, and give them extra learning. So this is brief learning. As teachers nowadays, or millennial teachers, or maybe the teacher for the Z generations, we should know at least this kind of tools. For example, maybe we have Zoom, YouTube, Google Classroom, okay, Kahoot, Quizzes, and WhatsApp. It's very important to inform them, right? To inform them, because students nowadays, they like short message. Okay, you just inform them, okay, class, so we have already uploaded the video in the Google Classroom. Okay, so they will go to the Google Classroom to watch your video and then also to answer the quizzes that you do. Okay, so because what we call it, communications with the students nowadays through this kind of apps is very important, because they like to do through that kind of apps. They like to communicate with the teachers and lecturers using WhatsApp, right? So this is it. So, and then also in the future class, they like to more, what we call it, there is two ways communication. It's not only from the lecturers, but also from them to us. So that's why we need this kind of apps that you need to understand of. Okay. And this is maybe what we call it, the example of the brief learning that we can, what we call plan. So let's say describing process, lecture, course, stage, lecture. So before the class, during the class, and after this class, what you are going to do. So all those things that you need to plan before going to apply the brief learning instructions in your own class. Okay, so that's my simple explanations, and then also simple sharing related to the brief e-learning. But if you want to know more about on how are we going to implement the brief e-learning in our class using virtual class or maybe offline class, so you can attend our TESOL Academy. And then in our TESOL Academy nowadays, we are going to combine between teaching practice and then also research and then publications. So that's why Dr. Paul said that we are going to do something new on the TESOL certificate. It means that there is element of the research to improve the teachers and lecturers, what we call it, skills on the teaching itself. Not only by practicing something already been there, but maybe try to create a new apps or new what we call it, methodology, or new what we call it, or platform for the teaching and learning. Okay, so thank you so much. That's all my presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can stop sharing your screen. Yeah, that was really brilliant and fantastic. And the way you explained everything about this flipped classrooms is really nice. I mean, the fact you used Bloom's taxonomy, where you can actually see how everything works in our classrooms. Thank you very much. And we do have questions from our participants. And the first one, we've got the first one from Miss Azra from Iran. She's asking, what are the differences of flipped and hybrid learning?
Okay. Thank you so much for the, what we call it, questions. What is the difference between flipped and hybrid learning? So we can see that the basic of the flipped learning itself is to make the students engage. Right, I think the same thing with the hybrid. But the things in the flipped learning, you have to see the condition and situations of the students. Right, it means that you have to see what technology the students have. Let's say that you are in the big and what we call it rich country, and maybe in the city. So of course the students may have the high technology. So it means that we can use the flipped learning using the high technology. But if you are maybe teaching in the rural area, on how are you going to, what we call it, engage with the students? So that's why video, I mean that flipped learning normally using video. When you are giving the baseline of the taxonomy, this is for the remember understanding. So you are not going to present it virtually. So they have already watched it at home using the video. So they watch it and then they understand it. So coming to the class, they are not blank. So they have already knowledge inside their mind. and then deep discussion inside of the class. So that's maybe in the flipped learning. But hybrid is, of course, that the high technology as well is there, but the things that's maybe the basic difference between the flipped and hybrid itself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And another questions. Just let us know what should be done first. Should we explain all the concepts for flipped classrooms, like, and send our students to work out, or should we just give them only instructions?
Okay. So in the video, normally that's the in every teaching, so we have to refer to the Bloom taxonomy. So that's why in the first stage that we have to give them what we call it a member and understanding. So to cover these two is up to you on how we're going to cover that. Whether you want to give what we call it lecturing using the video, or you want to give them some kind of activities maybe related to that. So it is up to you on how you're going to implement. But as long as that you cover this one before the class, that will be fine.
Mm-hmm. And I think this question is really important. Just how do we encourage the students to read or prepare before the class?
Okay,
how to encourage them?
That's the things that in flipped learning, you are not giving them what we call it a text to read, but we are giving them a video to watch. Because nowadays students, they don't like to read a lot on long text. They don't like it. They like to listen only. That's why we are using video in the flipped learning. So you have to record yourself by video, but the video don't make it too long. Just make it 20 minutes video, right? And then post it in the Google Classroom. They will watch it, and then they will answer the quiz to measure their understanding, right? But they can answer the quiz, and then they can watch the video many times, how many times they want, as long as that they are flexible, right, on that. So that's maybe the things that in flipped learning, we don't ask the students to read, but we ask them to watch.
Yeah, thank you. And as you can see, we have so many comments like saying thank you for your presentation. It was useful and insightful talk. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your ideas, because it's really important, especially now when we are not sure about our future. We don't know how it will be. So in Ukraine, we still don't know whether we'll go online or we'll continue doing everything offline. We'll see. So I think that, yeah, flipped learning could be just like a great tool for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Rod and Dr. Samad. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.
So actually, this is the end of our seminar.
Yeah, by the way, Dear Daddy is going to be one of our trainers during our online TESOL course that we are going to launch very soon. And of course, we're pretty much happy to have him on the board of trainers. So, and I'm sure that all the participants of the course, again, newly designed, internationally, with internationally recognized certificates, will be pretty much insightful for all the participants. So, and we are going to announce the dates of the course and all the details very soon. And me personally, I mean, I'm really happy basically to be in the same team together with you, Dear Daddy, Eva, Paul Harvey, Paul Robertson. So a very famous trainer, by the way, from Australia, Ms. Dora, and of course, our advisor of the course will be Rod Ellis himself. Okay, so, and I'd like just to again thanks to give my all thanks to everybody who joined today for this event, and my special thanks to you, Eva. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So see you soon, and you'll get all the information about the certificates just within 10 hours. Because I'm pretty sure that we'll have more participants who are going to watch this seminar a bit later due to time difference we have. So thank you very much. Thank you for participating in this seminar, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful day or evening, or just be happy.
Be happy.